Welcome, everyone. Tonight we embark on a journey into the strangest New Year's Eve you have never experienced. Imagine living in a world where you could celebrate 4 different New Years in a single week, where the date you chose to toast the coming year could literally curse you for 12 months, and where entire communities lived in terror that they had started their year on the wrong day. This is not fantasy. This was medieval Europe, and the calendar chaos that governed their lives was so bewildering that a simple journey across countries could make you a time traveler through 4 different years. Tonight we are stepping into the first of these rituals that people believe controlled their entire fate. So before we dive into this world together, I want to ask you something. If what I am sharing tonight brings you a moment of peace, a spark of curiosity, or just helps you drift into sleep a little easier, would you consider giving this video a like? Perhaps subscribe if you are into these kinds of stories. And I am genuinely curious, where in the world are you watching this from right now? Are you in bed, on a couch? Maybe driving through the night? Drop a comment and let me know. I love hearing from you. Now, dim those lights. Get comfortable. Maybe turn on a fan or some soft background noise, and let us begin this strange journey through medieval time itself. The merchant's journey through time. Picture this. It is the year 1245, and you are a merchant preparing to leave Venice for an important business trip. In Venice, where you stand right now, it is March 1st, the first day of the Venetian New Year. You have celebrated. You have toasted. You have made your resolutions. The year 1245 has officially begun for you. You feel the fresh start energy. You pack your goods and begin traveling westward. A few days later, you arrive in Florence. You step into the city square, and someone greets you with exciting news about something happening later this year, in 1244. Wait, 1244? You are confused. You left 1245. How did you go backward in time? But this is Florence. And here the new year begins on March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation. So technically, according to Florence, you are still in 1244. Their 1245 will not start for another 24 days. You shake your head, puzzled, but continue your journey. Next stop, Pisa. You arrive, conduct your business, and discover that in Pisa you have jumped forward again. It is now 1246 because Pisa celebrates their new year on March 25th, but they count it as the year ahead, not behind. You are officially living in 3 different years, depending on which city records your contracts. This is starting to feel absurd. But wait, it gets stranger. You continue westward into Provence, and suddenly you are back in 1245. Then you cross into France, and because you are arriving before Easter, which falls on April 16th this year, you are now once again in 1244. You have time traveled through 4 different years in one journey, and you have not even left mainland Europe. This was real. The historians Francis and Joseph Keyes documented this exact scenario in their book, Life in a Medieval City. This was not some rare confusion. This was everyday life. The terror of starting the wrong year. And here is the terrifying part that kept medieval people awake at night. What if you celebrated the new year on the wrong date? What if you made your vows, your resolutions, your prayers, your offerings to God and the saints on a day that was not actually the true beginning of the year? Would your entire year be cursed because you started on the wrong cosmic footing? Let me take you back further to understand how this chaos even began. In 46 BC, Julius Caesar established January 1st as the beginning of the Roman civil year. It made sense. January was named for Janus, the two-faced Roman god, who looked both backward at the past and forward to the future. Janus stood at doorways and beginnings. He was the perfect symbol for a new year. For centuries under Roman rule, January 1st was the date. Officials took office on this day. Legal contracts began on this day. Everyone knew when the year started. But then the Roman Empire fell. Christianity spread across Europe, and the church had a problem. January 1st was deeply pagan. It was tied to Roman gods, to pagan festivals, to celebrations the church found uncomfortable. So in 567, the Council of Tours made a decision. They abolished the January 1st New Year. They declared it too pagan, too unchristian, too connected to the old gods that the church was trying to erase from memory. But here is where things got messy. The church never agreed on what date should replace it. Different bishops, different regions, different kings all chose different dates based on their own logic, their own theological arguments, their own political needs. The calendar chaos unfolds. Some regions chose December 25th, Christmas Day, because that was when Christ was born. That seemed holy enough. The Anglo-Saxons originally celebrated this date. Others chose March 25th, Lady Day, the feast of the Annunciation, when the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary and told her she would bear God's Son. This was the moment Jesus was conceived, so it felt like a true beginning. England adopted this date in the 12th century and kept it for 600 years until 1752. Some places chose Easter, which moved every year based on lunar cycles, making everything even more confusing. Venice chose March 1st. Some regions in France had their own local dates. And here is what made it even more complex. When people talked about years, they often did not just say the calendar year. They would reference the regnal year of their king. So you might say it is the 5th year of King Richard's reign, and that year would begin on the anniversary of Richard's coronation, which could be any day of the year. Legal documents, debts, contracts, all of these were dated by regnal years, which meant you had to know not just what year you were in, but which king's counting system you were using, and when that particular king was crowned. The peasant's dilemma. Now imagine you are a medieval peasant. You are not educated. You cannot read. You do not have access to scholars or calendars. You live in a village where most people have never traveled more than 10 miles from home. Your village celebrates the New Year on March 25th, because that is what the local priest says. And the priest is the Word of God. You have always done it this way. Your parents did it this way. Their parents did it this way. This is the rhythm of life. But then you hear a rumor. A traveling merchant passed through and mentioned that in the next county over they celebrate New Year on January 1st, or maybe Christmas. You start to worry. What if they are right and we are wrong? What if we have been celebrating on the wrong date for generations? What if every single New Year's resolution we have ever made, every prayer we have offered for a prosperous year, every ritual we have performed to bring good fortune has been offered on the wrong day and therefore does not count? This fear was real. This anxiety lived in people's minds because medieval people did not see the new year as just a date on a calendar. They saw it as a cosmic reset, a moment when the universe took note, when God paid attention, when the spiritual realm opened up and received your intentions for the coming year. The new year was when you wiped the slate clean, when you could start fresh, when you could set your fate for the next 12 months. But if you did it on the wrong day, if you performed all your rituals when the cosmic energy was not aligned, when heaven was not listening, when the spiritual gates were not open, then you were doomed. You had essentially wasted your one chance for a fresh start. The real-world consequences. Let me give you a specific example of how seriously people took this. In medieval England, where March 25th was the official New Year, this date was not just symbolic. It had real legal consequences. Debts were due on Lady Day. Rents were paid on Lady Day. Contracts began and ended on Lady Day. Servants were hired or fired on Lady Day. If you were a tenant farmer and you owed rent to your lord, that rent came due on March 25th, not January 1st. If you miscalculated, if you thought you had more time because some other region celebrated a later New Year, you could find yourself evicted, homeless, your entire family out on the road. Court cases were dated by the year beginning March 25th. So if a crime was committed in February 1300 and the trial happened in April, that trial would be recorded as happening in 1300, and one even though we would think of both as 1300. This caused endless confusion in historical records. Historians today still have to carefully calculate which dating system a medieval document is using, or they will get events completely out of order. But the confusion went beyond just practical matters. It cut into the spiritual psychology of medieval life. Because here is what people believed. They believed that the moment of a new year, the true new year, was a thin place in time, a crack between the old and the new, a doorway between what was and what would be. And in that doorway, spiritual forces were active. God was listening. Saints were watching. Angels were recording. Demons were scheming. The choices you made in that moment, the prayers you spoke, the promises you offered, these echoed through the entire year to come. So if you performed your New Year's ritual on the wrong date, you were essentially screaming into the void. You were knocking on a door that was not open. Heaven was not listening that day because heaven was tuned to a different frequency, waiting for the real New Year, whenever that actually was. And even worse, while you were distracted celebrating the wrong New Year, the real New Year might have passed by without you noticing. You might have been working in the field or sleeping or arguing with your neighbor, completely missing the actual moment when fate was being decided. The village crisis. This created a paranoia that seeped into medieval culture. People became obsessed with getting the date right. Village priests would argue with traveling monks about the correct calculation of Easter, because if Easter was calculated wrong, then every date that depended on Easter was wrong. And that included many of the feast days that structured the entire year. Getting the calendar wrong was not just embarrassing, it was spiritually dangerous. It could cost you your salvation. Now let us talk about what happened in a village when people started to doubt their New Year date. Imagine it is a cold March evening in 1320 in a village in northern England. For as long as anyone can remember, this village has celebrated the New Year on March 25th. The local priest leads a special mass. Families gather. They make their New Year offerings. They pray for good crops, healthy children, protection from disease. They perform the rituals their grandparents taught them. They believe this is how you start a year correctly. But this year, a new priest has arrived. He is young, educated at a monastery in the south, and he brings troubling news. He has heard that some scholars believe the true New Year should be celebrated on January 1st, the old Roman date. He has read theological arguments suggesting that March 25th, while holy, is not the actual cosmic New Year. He suggests that maybe, just maybe, the village has been doing it wrong. Panic spreads. Families whisper to each other in the dark. Have we been cursed all these years? Is this why old Thomas's crops failed 3 years running? Is this why the miller's wife lost 2 babies? Is this why the winter has been so harsh? Have we been celebrating the wrong New Year and therefore living under a spiritual cloud of bad luck? Some villagers want to switch immediately to January 1st. Others are terrified to change. What if the old way was right and changing is what brings the curse? What if we have built up years of spiritual credit with heaven by celebrating on March 25th? And now we are going to throw that away. Arguments break out. Families divide. The village elder insists on keeping tradition. The young priest insists on following what he believes is correct theology. And in the middle of this fight, the actual calendar keeps turning. Days keep passing. And everyone is terrified that while they are arguing, they are missing the real New Year entirely, whichever date that is, and doom is settling over them like winter frost. This happened in villages across Europe. This was not rare because the Church's decision to abolish the pagan January 1st New Year and replace it with Christian dates had one massive flaw. The Church never united behind a single replacement date. Different bishops, different monasteries, different kingdoms made different choices. And once a tradition took root in a region, it was almost impossible to change, because changing the New Year date was not like changing your dinner menu. It was like changing your entire relationship with cosmic time, the astrological dimension. Here is another psychological layer that made this even more intense. Medieval people believed in astrology. They believed the stars and planets influenced earthly events, and different dates aligned with different astrological forces. January 1st occurred during Capricorn. March 25th occurred during Aries. December 25th occurred during Capricorn as well. Each of these dates had different astrological energy. If you celebrated New Year during Aries the Ram, you were tapping into fire energy, initiation energy, warrior energy. That might be good for starting bold new ventures. But if your personality or your village's needs were more aligned with earth energy, with practical stability, then maybe you needed a Capricorn New Year. But how would you know? Only astrologers knew. And not every village had access to an astrologer. So you were essentially guessing which cosmic energy you were supposed to be aligning with. And if you guessed wrong, you might be setting intentions that were fighting against the stars themselves. The wedding dispute. Let me give you one more example of how this calendar chaos played out in deeply human ways. Imagine a young woman, let us call her Elena, living in 14th century France. She is engaged to be married. Her wedding is planned for just after the New Year because that is auspicious. A fresh start, a new beginning, the perfect time to start a marriage. But her village celebrates New Year on Easter. This year Easter falls on April 10th. So her wedding is planned for April 15th. But Elena's fiancé is from a village 30 miles away, and his village celebrates New Year on March 25th, Lady Day. His family insists the wedding should happen right after their New Year, which means late March or early April. Elena's family insists it should happen after Easter, after their New Year. Both families believe that marrying too close to the old year, before the true New Year has arrived, will curse the marriage. Both families believe their date is the true New Year. The argument escalates. Both families dig in. This is not just about convenience. This is about the spiritual foundation of this marriage. If they marry on the wrong side of the New Year, the marriage will be built on old energy, stale energy, cursed energy. The young couple will struggle. They might be infertile. Their children might be sickly. Bad luck will follow them. This is what both families genuinely believe. In the end, they compromise on a date that satisfies no one. The wedding happens, but both families harbor resentment. They each secretly believe the other family has cursed the marriage by being too stubborn. And here is the tragic psychological truth. If that marriage does struggle, if Elena and her husband do face hardships, both families will blame it on the wedding date. They will say, "I told you so." They will use every piece of bad luck as evidence that the cosmic timing was wrong. And Elena and her husband will grow up believing their marriage was cursed from the start. Not because of any real cosmic force, but because their families planted the belief so deeply that it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The weight of calendar chaos. This is what calendar chaos did to medieval people. It created constant spiritual anxiety. It turned every major life decision into a cosmic gamble. Because if you could not even agree on when the year started, how could you trust any date for anything important? How could you know when to plant crops for the best harvest? How could you know when to sign a business contract for the best fortune? How could you know when to baptize a baby, or bury a dead relative, or start a journey or propose marriage? Every date was suspect. Every choice carried the weight of cosmic consequence. And underneath all of this was a deeper, more primal human fear. The fear that we are out of sync with the universe. That we are marching to the wrong rhythm. That while everyone else is aligned with cosmic time, we are drifting lost, cursed by our own ignorance. This fear lives in humans across all cultures and all eras. We want to believe we are in harmony with something larger than ourselves. We want to believe our rituals connect us to the divine. And when we suspect we might be doing it wrong, when we suspect we might be alone in the cosmic darkness performing meaningless gestures, that fear is almost unbearable. The medieval calendar chaos was a manifestation of this fear on a societal level, and it lasted for centuries. It was not until 1582, when Pope Gregory XIII finally created the Gregorian calendar and officially re-established January 1st as the universal new year for Catholic countries, that some of this chaos began to resolve. But even then, Protestant countries refused to adopt the Catholic calendar for decades, sometimes centuries, out of religious spite. England did not switch to January 1st until 1752, and when they did, they had to skip 11 days to catch up with the rest of Europe, which caused riots because people thought the government was stealing 11 days of their lives. The legacy of calendar chaos. The psychological wound that this calendar chaos created lasted for generations. Even today, we still feel echoes of it. We still have this anxiety about starting the year right. We still make New Year's resolutions on January 1st and feel guilty when we break them, as if we have missed our one cosmic chance. We still feel the pressure of the fresh start, the clean slate, the moment when we are supposed to transform ourselves. And when we fail, we feel like we have wasted the year, like we are now stuck in bad patterns until the next new year comes around and gives us permission to try again. This is the legacy of medieval New Year chaos. The belief that there is a right moment, a right date, a right cosmic alignment. And if we miss it, we are cursed to repeat our failures. But here is what medieval people understood that we often forget. The new year is not magic. The date is not magic. What matters is what you do with the belief. If believing in a fresh start gives you the courage to change, then the date you choose does not matter. The cosmic alignment does not matter. What matters is that you have given yourself permission to begin again. And that permission is always available on any date, in any year, in any moment when you decide that now is the time. But we are just beginning to scratch the surface of medieval New Year rituals, because once you figured out when to celebrate the new year, you then had to navigate an even more terrifying question. Who would be the first person to walk through your door after midnight? Because that stranger, that first footer, held your entire year's fate in their hands. And the rules about who could be your first footer, what they had to look like, what they had to bring, these rules were so specific and so bizarre that they make our modern superstitions look quaint. The first footer, midnight stranger of destiny. In our next part, we are going to meet the first footers, the midnight strangers who control destiny, and we are going to discover why having the wrong hair color could literally get you chased out of a village on New Year's Eve. So now you have figured out when your new year actually begins. You have navigated the calendar chaos. You have chosen your date. Maybe it is January 1st, maybe March 25th, maybe Easter. Whatever date you have settled on, you have prepared. You have cleaned your house. You have said your prayers. You have made your offerings. And now midnight approaches. The old year is dying. The new year is about to be born. You stand in your home with your family, and you wait. Because what happens in the next few minutes will determine whether the next 12 months bring you prosperity or ruin. And the terrifying part, your fate does not depend on you. It depends on whoever walks through your door first. This is the ritual of first footing. And if you think the calendar confusion was stressful, wait until you hear about the rules that governed who could be your first footer. Because medieval people, particularly in Scotland, Ireland, and Northern England, believed with absolute conviction that the first person to cross your threshold after the new year began would carry either blessing or curse into your home. And that blessing or curse would stick to your household for the entire year. There was no do-over. There was no second chance. The first footer set your fate, and you were stuck with it until the next new year came around. Let me paint you a picture of what this looked like. It is New Year's Eve. Let us say around the year 1450, in a village in the Scottish Highlands. The sun has set. Families are gathered in their homes. Doors are closed. In some homes, doors are actually locked, which is unusual because medieval homes rarely lock their doors. But tonight is different. Tonight, you cannot risk the wrong person stumbling in. Fires are burning in hearths. Children are being kept awake because everyone needs to be alert at midnight. Women are preparing special foods, preparing gifts, preparing drinks. Because when the right first footer arrives, you need to welcome them properly. Men are standing near windows, watching the road, watching the shadows, trying to catch a glimpse of who might be approaching. And then the church bell rings. Midnight. The new year has arrived. Every family holds their breath. Who will knock first? The rules of first footing. Because here is the thing. The first footer was not usually a family member. It had to be someone from outside the household, someone who represented the outside world, bringing energy into your domestic space. And what that person looked like, what they carried, even how they walked, all of this mattered desperately. Let us start with the most controversial rule: hair color. In most of Scotland and parts of northern England, the ideal first footer was a dark-haired man. Dark hair was considered lucky. It was associated with the native Celtic people, with deep roots in the land, with stability and prosperity. If a dark-haired man was your first footer, you breathed a sigh of relief. Your year was off to a good start. But if a light-haired person, especially a blonde, knocked on your door first, some families would literally not open the door. They would pretend no one was home. They would wait for that person to leave and pray that someone else, someone with the right hair color, would come next. And redheads. Red-haired people were considered the worst possible first footers in many regions. Red hair was associated with Vikings, with invaders, with violence and bad luck. There were documented cases of red-haired people being chased away from villages on New Year's Eve because no one wanted to risk them accidentally becoming someone's first footer. Can you imagine that? Being born with red hair, and knowing that every New Year's Eve you had to stay inside, away from everyone, because your mere presence near someone's door could curse them for a year. But wait, it gets more specific. In some regions, the first footer had to be a man. Women were considered unlucky first footers. The reasoning varied. Some believed women carried too much association with childbirth and blood, which were considered spiritually dangerous in medieval thinking. Others believed women were too connected to the home and domestic space. So having a woman as first footer would not bring energy from outside. You needed a man, someone who represented the external world, commerce, protection, provision, and not just any man. In some villages, the first footer had to be tall. Short men were unlucky. The logic was that a tall man had presence, authority, the ability to reach high places, which symbolized reaching for prosperity. A short man suggested limitation, staying low, remaining small. Again, can you imagine being a short man in medieval Scotland, and knowing that half the village did not want you near their homes on New Year's Eve, because your height might curse their year? In other regions, the first footer could not be flat-footed. Why? Because flat-footedness was associated with clumsiness, with being earthbound, with an inability to move gracefully through the world. But in some areas, the rule was reversed. Flat-footed people were considered lucky because they had more contact with the earth, more connection to stability and grounding. So depending on which village you lived in, the same physical trait could be either blessed or cursed. Now are you starting to see the psychological torture of this system? Because if you were a medieval person, you had no control over who your first footer would be. You could prepare everything else. You could clean your house, prepare your food, say your prayers, do all the rituals correctly. But the moment midnight struck, Your fate was in the hands of random chance. Would the right person show up, or would the wrong person doom you to 12 months of bad luck? The required gifts. And here is where it gets even more intense. The first footer was not supposed to arrive empty-handed. They had to bring specific gifts. In Scotland, the traditional first footer gifts were salt, coal, shortbread, and a small amount of whiskey or money. Each item carried symbolic meaning. Salt represented preservation, the ability to keep food safe, protection against corruption. Coal represented warmth, the ability to survive winter, the continuity of the hearth fire, which was the heart of the home. Shortbread represented food, prosperity, the assurance that you would not go hungry. Whiskey represented celebration, joy, community. Money represented wealth and financial security. If your first footer arrived with all of these items, you were golden. Your year was blessed. But if they showed up with nothing, or worse, with only some of the items, what did that mean? Did it mean you would only have partial luck? Would only some areas of your life prosper while others suffered? And what if they brought the wrong items? What if someone showed up with bread but no salt? Did that mean you would have food but it would spoil? What if they brought coal but no whiskey? Did that mean you would survive but not thrive? These were real anxieties that kept people awake on New Year's Eve. The social hierarchy of luck. And here is the thing. The first footer system created enormous social pressure. Because in tight-knit medieval communities, everyone knew who was considered lucky and who was considered unlucky. If you were a dark-haired, tall, well-formed man in medieval Scotland, you were in high demand on New Year's Eve. Families would practically beg you to be their first footer. They would offer you food, drink, gifts, anything to ensure you would visit their home right after midnight. Being a desirable first footer gave you social power. You could use it to build alliances, to gain favors, to move up in the community hierarchy. But if you were red-haired or blonde or a woman or short or had any of the unlucky traits, you were marginalized. You were made to feel that your very existence was a threat to others' well-being. And on New Year's Eve, you might be explicitly told to stay home, to keep away, because no one wanted you near their doors. The first footer tradition, which was meant to bring communities together in shared celebration, actually created hierarchies of luck. It divided people into the blessed, and the cursed based on traits they could not control. The tragic story of the blonde woman. Let me tell you a story that illustrates just how seriously people took this. There is a documented account from 19th century Scotland, which was continuing medieval traditions, of a family that had a terrible year. Crops failed. 2 children died of illness. The father broke his leg. The mother became ill, and when the family looked back, trying to understand why so much tragedy had struck them, they remembered their first footer from the previous New Year. It had been a blonde woman. She had knocked on their door just after midnight, seeking shelter from the cold. The family, being kind-hearted, had let her in, given her food and a place by the fire. They had been charitable, but by letting her in first, they had made her their first footer. And according to village logic, that was why their year had been cursed. The blonde woman had brought bad luck. It was not her fault, poor woman. She had not meant to curse anyone, but her very presence, her hair color, her gender had doomed this family. The psychological weight of this belief was crushing. Because here is what happened. Once the family decided that the blonde woman was the cause of their troubles, they interpreted everything through that lens. The crops failed, the blonde woman's curse. The children died, the blonde woman's curse. Every piece of bad luck, every misfortune was traced back to that one moment on New Year's Eve. And here is the tragic part. This kind of belief actually makes you more likely to experience bad luck. Because when you believe you are cursed, you become anxious. Anxiety affects your decision-making. You might take fewer risks, become more cautious, miss opportunities. You might also become hypervigilant, seeing threats everywhere, which creates stress that affects your health. The belief in the curse creates behaviors that make the curse seem real. The ritual entry. But let us go back to the mechanics of first footing because there were even more rules. In some regions, the first footer could not speak until they had completed a specific ritual. They would enter the home in silence. They would approach the hearth and place coal on the fire, symbolically keeping the home's warmth alive into the new year. Then, they would turn and greet the family with a blessing. Only after the blessing could normal conversation begin. If the first footer spoke too soon, before completing the ritual, the blessing was broken. The luck would not stick. In other areas, the first footer had to enter through the front door and leave through the back door, never retracing their steps. The logic was that luck should flow through the house in one direction, from entrance to exit, carrying away the old year's troubles and leaving behind the new year's blessings. If the first footer came in and left the same way, they would take the luck back with them. The energy would not settle. And here is another layer. The first footer tradition was not just about receiving luck. It was also about the first footer themselves. Because by going to someone's home and being their first footer, you were taking on spiritual responsibility. You were connecting your fate to their fate. If they had a good year, it reflected well on you. You had brought blessing. People would remember you fondly, might seek you out again the next year, might offer you favors in return. But if they had a bad year, you might be blamed. People might whisper that you were not as lucky as everyone thought. Your reputation as a first footer could be damaged. So being a first footer was not just an honor. It was a risk. Professional first footers. This created interesting social dynamics. Some men made careers out of being professional first footers. They would plan routes through their village, visiting multiple homes in the early hours of the new year, bringing blessings to as many families as possible. They would be rewarded with food, drink, sometimes money. It became a way to earn respect and build social capital. But it was also exhausting, and the pressure was immense because if even one family you visited had a bad year, your reputation could suffer. Now let us talk about what happened when the first footer system went wrong. Imagine this scenario. It is New Year's Eve in a small village. A family is waiting for their first footer. They have arranged for their neighbor's son, a dark-haired young man, to visit them right after midnight. He has agreed. They have prepared gifts for him, food, drink, a warm welcome. But midnight comes and goes. 5 minutes pass, 10 minutes. Where is he? Did he forget? Did something happen to him? The family starts to panic because every minute that passes is a minute when someone else might arrive first. A stranger, someone with the wrong hair color, someone carrying bad luck, and then disaster. There is a knock at the door. The father rushes to answer it, hoping it is the young man they have been expecting. But no, it is a traveling merchant, a blond man seeking shelter for the night. He has no idea about the first footer tradition. He is just cold and tired and hoping for hospitality. The family faces an impossible choice. Do they turn him away, refuse him shelter on a freezing night, which would be a sin against Christian charity, or do they let him in and accept that he will be their first footer, carrying blonde hair's supposed curse into their home? The father hesitates. The mother is whispering frantically behind him. The children are staring. The merchant at the door is confused, wondering why these people are looking at him like he is a demon. And in that moment, you can feel the collision between two moral systems. The Christian duty to show hospitality to strangers, and the pagan superstition that this particular stranger will curse your household for a year. Which system wins? Which fear is stronger? The fear of angering God by refusing charity, or the fear of angering fate by accepting the wrong first footer? Different families made different choices in these moments. Some turned the stranger away, damning themselves in the eyes of the church, but protecting themselves, they believed, from cosmic bad luck. Others let the stranger in, showing charity, but spending the rest of the year anxious and fearful, interpreting every small misfortune as evidence of the curse taking hold. The psychology of control. And here is what makes the first footer tradition so psychologically fascinating. It is a perfect example of how humans try to control the uncontrollable. Medieval life was brutally uncertain. Disease, famine, war, accident, death, all of these could destroy you at any moment. And there was almost nothing you could do to protect yourself. Medicine was primitive. Food security was fragile. Violence was common. You lived at the mercy of forces you did not understand. So you created rituals to give yourself the illusion of control. If you could just get the first footer right, if you could just ensure the right person crossed your threshold, then maybe you could control your fate. Maybe you could steer your year toward prosperity instead of ruin. But of course you could not control who your first footer would be. Not really. You could try. You could make arrangements, ask specific people to visit, lock your doors against the wrong people. but random chance always had the final word. A storm could delay your planned first footer. A stranger could arrive unexpectedly. Your own family member could forget the rules and walk through the door at the wrong moment, accidentally becoming the first footer themselves. And when things went wrong, when you ended up with the wrong first footer, you were left with two choices. You could accept it, resign yourself to a cursed year, live in fear, and interpret every bad thing that happened as inevitable. Or you could find a way to break the curse, to undo the damage. And this is where other rituals came in. Some families would perform cleansing ceremonies after a bad first footer. They would burn herbs, sprinkle holy water, say specific prayers, trying to neutralize the bad luck before it could settle in. But these cleansing rituals were controversial. Some priests said they were pagan magic and therefore sinful. Others quietly acknowledged that people needed some way to cope with first footing gone wrong and turned a blind eye. The modern echo. The first footer tradition lasted for centuries in Scotland and parts of northern England. Even today, in the 21st century, some families in these regions still practice first footing. The rules have relaxed. Hair color matters less. Women can be first footers now. But the core idea persists. The first person to enter your home in the new year brings energy with them. And you want that energy to be positive. You want to start the year with good vibes, not bad ones. So you still choose your first footer carefully, or you go out and be someone else's first footer, carrying blessings from house to house. And here is what this tells us about human psychology. We need rituals to mark transitions. We need moments when we can say this is the boundary between old and new. And we need those moments to feel significant. We need them to carry weight, because if the transition from old year to new year is just another midnight, just another day ticking over on the calendar, then nothing changes. We are still carrying all our old patterns, our old failures, our old disappointments. But if midnight is a magical threshold, a doorway between worlds, a moment when fate is decided, then we can believe in the possibility of transformation. We can believe that this year will be different, that we can start fresh, that we are not trapped in our past. The first footer tradition gave medieval people a concrete way to enact that belief. It made the transition tangible. It gave them something to do, someone to blame or thank, a ritual to perform that made them feel like participants in their own fate rather than helpless victims of chaos. And even though the logic of hair color and height and gender was arbitrary and often cruel, the deeper need it was serving was universal and deeply human. From first footers to sacred trees. But first footing was just one part of a much larger web of New Year's rituals. Because once you had navigated the first footer, once that person had brought their blessing or curse into your home, you still had to ensure your prosperity for the rest of the year. And one of the most powerful ways to do that involved going out into the frozen orchards in the dead of winter, gathering around ancient apple trees and singing, screaming, and shooting guns into the branches to wake the spirits that controlled your food supply. This was wassailing, and it was magnificent, terrifying, and absolutely essential. Let us step into those orchards now, and see what it took to convince the trees to keep you alive. There is something primal about the sound of gunshots echoing through a winter orchard at midnight. The crack of firearms splitting the frozen air. The smell of gunpowder mixing with wood smoke and malt cider. Men shouting at trees. Women singing ancient songs to branches heavy with ice. Children banging pots and pans, making as much noise as humanly possible. And at the center of it all, a young woman being lifted onto a man's shoulders, holding a piece of toast soaked in hot cider on a long fork, reaching up to place it carefully in the highest branches of the oldest apple tree in the orchard. This is wassailing. And if you think it sounds absolutely insane, you are right. But for medieval farming communities in England's cider-producing regions, this ritual was not optional folklore. It was survival. Let us go back to understand why this mattered so desperately. If you lived in medieval Somerset, Devon, Herefordshire, or Kent, your life depended on apples. Not just for eating, though apples were important food, but for drinking, because cider was the primary beverage for working people in these regions. Water was often unsafe. Beer required grain that could be eaten as bread. But apples could be pressed into cider, and cider would keep you hydrated, give you calories, provide some nutrition, and most importantly, the alcohol would kill bacteria that made water dangerous. A failed apple harvest was not just inconvenient. It could mean your family went thirsty. It could mean you had nothing to trade at market. It could mean you could not pay your rent to your lord, which could mean eviction, which could mean death. The wassailing ceremony. So when New Year came around, specifically on 12th night January 5th or 6th, or in some regions Old 12th night January 17th, farming communities gathered in their orchards to perform a ritual that they genuinely believed would determine whether their trees bore fruit that year. They called it wassailing from the Old English toast, ways hail, meaning be in good health. But this was not a gentle blessing ceremony. This was spiritual warfare. This was humans negotiating with nature spirits for their very survival. Picture this. It is January the 17th in a village in Somerset. The date is Old 12th night, calculated by the old Julian calendar that some rural areas still followed even after reforms. The sun has set hours ago. The temperature is below freezing. Ice coats every branch. In normal circumstances, no one would go outside on a night like this. But tonight, the entire village is gathering at the edge of the largest orchard in the area. Men are carrying torches. Women are carrying a massive wooden bowl filled with hot wassail, a drink made from malt cider, honey, spices, and chunks of cooked apple floating on top. This floating apple creates a texture people called lamb's wool because that is what it looked like. Children are carrying pots, pans, bells, rattles, anything that makes noise. At the front of the procession are two figures dressed more elaborately than the others. the wassail king and the wassail queen. These are not royalty. They are chosen from the community, often a respected older farmer, and a young woman of good reputation. Their role is to lead the ceremony, to speak the blessings, to be the human representatives in negotiations with the tree spirits. The queen has been preparing for this role for weeks. She has practiced the songs. She has memorized the specific phrases that must be said, because getting the words wrong could invalidate the entire ceremony. And that would mean the whole village's apple harvest could fail. That is the weight on her shoulders. Meeting the king tree. As she walked through the frozen orchard, they reached the largest tree. This is the king tree, the patriarch of the orchard. In Somerset folklore, this tree was believed to be inhabited by the apple tree man, a spirit who controlled the fertility of all the other trees. If you could please the apple tree man, he would ensure a bountiful harvest. If you angered him, every tree in the orchard would bear little or no fruit. The apple tree man was not a Christian figure. This was old pagan animism surviving in the countryside centuries after England had officially converted to Christianity. The local priest probably disapproved, but the priest also drank cider, so he turned a blind eye. The wassail queen is lifted onto a man's shoulders. In her hands, she holds a long toasting fork with a piece of bread impaled on it. This bread has been soaking in the wassail bowl, absorbing the hot cider and spices. She reaches up as high as she can and carefully places this cider-soaked toast into the branches of the king tree. This is the offering. The tree spirit needs to be fed. The logic was beautifully simple. If you give the tree food, the tree will give you food in return. It is a transaction, a contract between humans and nature. As she places the toast, she sings. The exact words varied by region, but a common version from Somerset went like this. Apple tree, we all come to wassail thee. Bear this year, and next year to bloom and to blow. Hatfuls, capfuls, three-cornered sackfuls, hip, 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 hooray, holler, boys, holler, hooray. The imagery is specific. Hatfuls, capfuls, sackfuls. This is not a vague wish for prosperity. This is a demand for a specific quantity of apples, enough to fill hats, enough to fill three-cornered sacks, which were traditional harvesting bags. The wassailers were essentially negotiating their contract terms with the tree spirit. We will feed you and honor you. In return, you will give us this much fruit. Do we have a deal? The sacred noise. And then the noise begins. This is the part that must have been absolutely wild to witness. Every person in the crowd starts making as much sound as possible. Men fire shotguns into the branches. The gunshots serve two purposes. First, the noise wakes the tree spirits. In January, trees are dormant, asleep for winter. The wassailers believed the spirits were sleeping too, and needed to be woken up violently to pay attention to the blessing being offered. Second, the gunshots drive away evil spirits because it was not enough to wake the good spirits. You also had to scare away any malevolent entities that might be lurking in the branches waiting to spoil the harvest. Children bang pots and pans. Women rattle bells. Men shout and howl. In Sussex and Surrey, this practice was called apple howling because of the sheer volume of noise. Can you imagine what this sounded like? A crowd of people screaming at a tree in the middle of a frozen night with gunshots echoing across the valley. Neighbors miles away would have heard it, and they would have known exactly what it was. That is the sound of survival. That is the sound of a community doing everything in their power to ensure they do not starve next winter. But the noise served another psychological purpose too. It created unity. When you are standing in a freezing orchard at midnight shouting with your neighbors, you are bonded to them. You are participating in something larger than yourself. The individual powerlessness you feel in the face of nature's uncertainty is transformed into collective power. Alone you cannot make trees bear fruit. But together making this amount of noise, performing this ritual with this much conviction, maybe you can. Maybe the universe will pay attention. After the noise dies down, the wassail bowl is passed around. Everyone drinks from it. This is important. The same liquid that was offered to the tree is now shared among the humans. It creates a connection. The tree and the community are drinking from the same source. Some wassailers would even pour cider directly onto the roots of the tree, literally feeding it the same drink they were consuming. In some regions, they would pour cider over the toast in the branches, making sure the tree spirit got the full nutritional benefit, and then they would move to the next tree. Not every tree in the orchard was wassailed. That would take too long. But the largest, most productive trees were all honored. And as the procession moved from tree to tree repeating the ritual, something interesting happened. People got drunk. The wassail bowl was refilled multiple times. The cider was hot and strong by the time they had wassailed 5 or 6 trees. The ceremony was becoming increasingly chaotic. Songs became sloppier. Gunshots became more random. The noise-making became more enthusiastic and less coordinated. And honestly, this might have been part of the point, because the louder and wilder the humans became, the more convinced they were that they were making an impression on the spirit world. The legend of the apple tree man. Now, let me tell you about a specific piece of folklore that reveals how seriously people took this. In Somerset, there was a legend about a poor farmer who had a failing orchard. Year after year, his trees produced almost nothing. He was on the verge of losing his land. He could not pay his rent. His family was going hungry. On one New Year's Eve, after everyone else in the village had finished celebrating, this farmer went alone to his orchard. He had 1 mug of mulled cider left, the last cider he had. He was so desperate that he decided to offer it all to the trees, not because he believed it would work, but because he had nothing else to try. He went to the oldest tree in his orchard and poured the entire mug of cider onto its roots. And he spoke to the tree. he said. "Old friend, this is all I have left. I am giving it to you. If you can help me, please do. If you cannot, I understand, but I am trusting you." And then he went home to bed. According to the legend, he was woken in the middle of the night by a voice. He went outside, and there was the apple tree man, the spirit of that old tree glowing in the darkness. And the apple tree man said, "You have shown me respect when everyone else ignored me. You gave me your last drink when you yourself were thirsty. I will reward your faith." And the spirit revealed to the farmer the location of a pot of gold buried beneath the tree's roots. The farmer dug it up, found the treasure, paid his debts, and his orchard flourished from that year forward. Now, this is obviously a folk tale. It is not historical fact. But here is what is fascinating. This story was told and retold for centuries in Somerset. It was recorded in multiple versions in the 19th century when folklorists were documenting these traditions. And the reason the story persisted is because it captured something true about the psychology of wassailing. The ritual was not just about scaring away evil spirits or feeding good spirits. It was about respect. It was about acknowledging that humans are not separate from nature. We are dependent on it. We are in relationship with it, and relationships require reciprocity. The science behind the magic. When you wassail a tree, you are treating it as a partner, not a resource. You are acknowledging its power over your life. You are asking, not demanding. You are offering something in return for what you hope to receive. This is a fundamentally different mindset than modern industrial agriculture, where we try to dominate nature, force it to produce on our timeline, extract maximum yield regardless of the cost. The wassailers understood that you cannot force a tree to give you apples. You can only create conditions where the tree wants to bear fruit. And one of those conditions is showing respect. But let us be clear, did wassailing actually work? Did shouting at trees and firing guns into branches and placing toast in them actually increase apple yields? Well, here is where it gets interesting. There is some evidence that the answer might be yes, but not for magical reasons. Modern agricultural science has shown that fruit trees produce more abundantly when they experience stress at certain points in their growth cycle. Mild stress can trigger a tree to produce more fruit as a survival mechanism. Now, think about what wassailing involves. You are shaking the tree with loud noises. You are potentially disturbing birds and insects that might be nesting in the branches and eating nutrients. You are introducing organic matter, the toast and cider, which decomposes and fertilizes the soil around the roots. None of this is magic, but it might actually have beneficial effects. Also, consider the timing. Wassailing happened in January during dormancy. This is actually a good time to prune trees, to clear dead branches, to inspect for disease. Many wassailing ceremonies included trimming dead wood from the trees as part of the ritual. So wassailing was in part practical maintenance disguised as spiritual ceremony. The farmers were doing the agricultural work that needed doing anyway, but they were framing it as a negotiation with spirits, which gave the work deeper meaning and ensured everyone participated. There is also the social dimension. Wassailing was a community event. It required cooperation, and communities that cooperate tend to have better outcomes in general. When everyone in a village works together to maintain the orchards, when everyone has a stake in the harvest, when everyone participates in the rituals that mark the seasons, you create social cohesion. And social cohesion means people help each other during hard times. It means knowledge is shared. It means the whole community is invested in everyone's survival. So, did the wassailing itself make trees produce more apples? Maybe a little through practical effects. But did the practice of wassailing create communities that were better equipped to survive agricultural challenges? Absolutely yes. And in medieval life, where survival was always uncertain, that social benefit might have been more valuable than any direct effect on the trees. When wassailing was skipped. Now let us talk about what happened when wassailing was not performed. There are historical records from various regions documenting years when the wassailing was skipped either because of plague or war or religious pressure from authorities, who considered it too pagan. And in several of these cases, the apple harvest that year was poor. Now this could be coincidence. Weather and disease affect harvests regardless of rituals. But in the minds of medieval people, cause and effect were clear. They skipped the wassailing. The trees did not produce. The two were connected. And this belief was reinforced year after year. In years when wassailing happened and the harvest was good, the ritual got credit. In years when wassailing was skipped and the harvest was poor, the absence of ritual got blame. This is confirmation bias in action. But it is also something more. It is the creation of a narrative that gives people a sense of agency in an uncertain world. You cannot control the weather. You cannot prevent tree disease. You cannot stop insects or birds from damaging your crop. But you can wassail. You can perform the ritual correctly. You can show respect to the tree spirits. You can give the offering. And if the harvest fails anyway, well, maybe you did not wassail enthusiastically enough. Maybe someone in the village broke the ritual rules. Maybe an evil spirit was too strong this year. But the framework remains intact. The belief that your actions matter, that your rituals have power, that you are not completely helpless. The survival of wassailing. And here is something beautiful about wassailing. It is one of the few medieval traditions that never completely died. Even as England urbanized, even as industrial agriculture replaced small family orchards, even as Christianity became more dominant and tried to suppress pagan practices, wassailing survived in pockets. In Devon, in Somerset, in Herefordshire, small communities kept doing it. Families passed down the songs. Farmers taught their children the rituals. And in the 20th and 21st centuries, there has actually been a revival. Modern wassailing events happen every January in dozens of communities across England. Morris dancers perform. Cider flows. Shotguns still fire into branches in some places, though in others they have switched to banging pots and pans for safety reasons. The ritual has adapted, but it persists. Why? Because wassailing meets a need that never goes away. The need to mark the turning of seasons. The need to acknowledge our dependence on nature. The need to gather with community and do something together that feels meaningful. In our modern world, we have lost most of our seasonal rituals. We eat strawberries in December and apples in July because global supply chains make seasons irrelevant. But something in us still wants to celebrate the winter solstice, the spring planting, the autumn harvest. We want rituals that connect us to the earth and to each other. Wassailing provides that. It is a direct line to our ancestors, who understood that humans and trees are in this together, beyond the orchard. But as magical and communal as wassailing was, it was only one part of the web of New Year's rituals that medieval people believed controlled their fate. Because after you had negotiated with the tree spirits, after you had ensured your food supply, you still had to face the most intimate and personal question. What would your own individual year look like? Would you find love or lose it? Would you prosper or fall into poverty? Would you stay healthy or fall ill? And to answer these questions, medieval people turned to an array of divination practices so specific, so strange, and so psychologically revealing that they make modern horoscopes look like casual entertainment. Let us move from the orchards into the quiet candle-lit rooms where people peered into their futures using wax, dice, and the random pages of holy books. Silence. After all the chaos of wassailing, after the gunshots and the shouting and the community celebration, now comes the most intimate and terrifying part of the medieval New Year. You are alone in your room. A single candle flickers on the table. Outside, the village has gone quiet. It is past midnight. The new year has arrived. And now it is time to ask the questions you have been carrying in your heart for weeks. Will the person you love return your feelings this year? Will you survive the coming winter? Will your business prosper or fail? Will you conceive the child you desperately want? Will the illness you have been hiding from others finally take you? These are not casual curiosities. These are life and death questions. And on New Year's night, medieval people believed the veil between present and future grew thin enough to see through. If you knew the right methods, if you had the courage to look. Welcome to Divination Night, the moment when medieval people attempted to read their fate for the entire year ahead. And I want to be clear about something from the start. This was not entertainment. This was not a party game. The divination practices people performed on New Year's were done in deadly seriousness, often in solitude, sometimes with fasting and prayer beforehand, always with the understanding that what you discovered could change everything about how you lived the next 12 months. Would you see symbols of death? Then you would spend the year preparing your soul, making peace with enemies, setting your affairs in order. Would you see symbols of wealth? Then you might take business risks you would otherwise avoid. Would you see symbols of love? Then you might finally speak to the person you have been too afraid to approach. The future you glimpsed on New Year's night became the map you followed all year. So let us explore the methods medieval people used. And let us understand what it felt like to believe your entire fate could be revealed in the shapes formed by dripping wax. Ceromancy, reading molten wax. Ceromancy, the divination by melted wax. This was one of the most popular New Year's fortune-telling methods throughout medieval Europe. The process was simple, but required steady hands and absolute focus. You would light a candle, preferably a white or beeswax candle, because those were considered purest. You would hold this candle over a bowl of cold water, and you would let the wax drip slowly into the water, watching as it cooled and hardened into shapes. The shapes that formed were read as symbols, messages from the divine or from fate itself, revealing what the coming year held. But here is what made it psychologically intense. The shapes were never obvious. They were abstract, organic, open to interpretation. You might see a blob of wax that vaguely resembled a bird. But what did that mean? Flight, freedom, a message coming from far away, or was it an ill omen like ravens that gather at battlefields? The interpretation depended partly on traditional symbol meanings that were passed down through families and communities, but it also depended on your own intuition, your own fears and hopes projecting themselves onto the random forms created by cooling wax. Let me walk you through what this actually looked like. Imagine you are a young woman named Beatrice living in 14th century England. You are 18 years old. There is a young man in your village, the blacksmith's apprentice, and you believe you love him. But he has not spoken to you directly. You do not know if he has noticed you. You do not know if he intends to court you or if he plans to marry someone else. This uncertainty is eating at you. And so on New Year's night, alone in your room after your family has gone to sleep, you decide to consult the wax. You light your candle. Your hands are shaking slightly, not from cold, but from anticipation and fear. Because what if the wax reveals something you do not want to see? What if it shows you dying alone? What if it shows you married to someone else, someone your father chooses for you? What if it shows emptiness, nothingness, a year of waiting with no resolution? But you have to know. Not knowing is worse than any answer the wax could give you. So you hold the candle over the bowl of water, and you ask your question silently in your mind. Will he love me this year? Will we be together? The wax begins to drip. White drops falling into the water, spreading for a moment before they cool and solidify. The first few drops create random splatters, but then a larger piece of wax falls and creates a more defined shape. You stare at it, turning the bowl slightly, trying to see what it looks like from different angles, and slowly an interpretation forms in your mind. It looks like two figures standing close together. Or does it? Maybe you are seeing what you want to see. Maybe it is just a random blob. But the more you look, the more convinced you become. Those are two people. That is you and him. The wax is telling you the union is coming. And here is where the psychology gets fascinating. Because now you have received this message from the wax. You begin to behave differently. You have more confidence. When you see the blacksmith's apprentice in the village, you smile at him more openly. You find excuses to walk past the smithy. You are more willing to take small risks in conversation because you believe fate is on your side. And what happens? He notices your confidence. He finds it attractive. He begins to pay attention to you. And by the end of the year, you are indeed courting. The wax was right. It predicted your future accurately. Except did it really? Or did the belief in the prediction change your behavior in ways that made the prediction come true? This is the self-fulfilling prophecy at its most powerful. The divination gave you permission to act on your desires. It gave you confidence that reduced your fear of rejection. And that confidence made you more attractive, more approachable, more likely to succeed. The wax did not predict the future. The wax created the future by changing your behavior in the present. The dark side of divination. But not all ceremancy readings were hopeful. Imagine the opposite scenario. You perform the wax divination, and you see shapes that terrify you. A skull, a cross that looks like a grave marker, dark shadows that suggest death. You interpret these symbols as meaning you will die this year. And now what? How do you live with that knowledge? Some people became paralyzed by fear. They withdrew from life, became overly cautious, avoided any risk, and in some tragic cases, this fear itself made them more vulnerable. The stress weakened their immune systems. The depression made them less careful about their health. The isolation meant no one noticed when they became ill, and sometimes they did indeed die the year. The wax predicted correctly, except again the prediction caused the outcome. This is the dark side of divination. When you give a method of fortune-telling real power over your psychology, when you genuinely believe what it tells you, you can inadvertently make negative predictions come true just as easily as positive ones. And medieval people understood this danger. That is why many divination practices came with warnings. You were advised not to perform them if you were in a dark mental state. You were told to pray for protection before attempting divination. You were counseled to interpret symbols generously, to look for hope rather than despair. Because wise practitioners understood that the real power of divination was not in revealing a fixed future, but in shaping the present mindset of the person seeking answers. Bibliomancy, divine guidance through Scripture. Now let us talk about another method, bibliomancy, divination by randomly opening books. In medieval Europe, the primary book used for this was the Bible, though some educated people also used classical texts like Virgil's Aeneid. The method was straightforward. You would hold the holy book closed, concentrate on your question, then open it randomly to any page. The first verse or passage your eyes landed on was considered your answer, your prophecy for the coming year. This practice had ancient roots. The Romans called it sortes Virgilianae when they used Virgil's poetry. Early Christians adapted it, calling it sortes sanctorum, holy lots, using scripture instead of pagan texts. The medieval church had a complicated relationship with this practice. Officially, many church authorities condemned it as superstition. Divination was forbidden in the Bible itself. Deuteronomy specifically warns against seeking omens. And yet, bibliomancy persisted even among clergy because people desperately needed some way to seek guidance for the uncertain future. The psychological appeal of bibliomancy was that it felt less occult than other methods. You were not consulting demons or spirits. You were not using pagan rituals. You were simply opening the Word of God and trusting that divine providence would guide your hand to the passage you needed to read. This was faith, not magic. At least that is how practitioners rationalized it. And honestly, there is something beautiful about that rationalization. It acknowledges human need for guidance, while trying to stay within religious boundaries. But here is what made bibliomancy so powerful and so dangerous. The Bible contains every possible human experience. It contains stories of triumph and tragedy, love and betrayal, salvation and damnation, prosperity and poverty, peace and war. No matter what you are feeling, no matter what you are hoping or fearing, there is a passage that will resonate with you. So when you open the Bible randomly and read whatever verse appears, your mind will find meaning in it. You will connect it to your situation. You will interpret it as relevant to your question. Let me give you a specific historical example. In medieval England, there was a documented case of a merchant who was considering a risky business venture. He would have to borrow a large sum of money, travel to a foreign country, invest in goods he hoped to resell at profit. If it succeeded, he would become wealthy. If it failed, he would be ruined, possibly imprisoned for debt. He could not decide. The risk felt too great. So on New Year's night, he performed bibliomancy. He prayed asking God to guide him. Then he opened his Bible randomly. His finger landed on a verse from the book of Proverbs, chapter 13, verse 11. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. The merchant read this and interpreted it as a warning against his risky venture. God was telling him to be patient, to build wealth slowly and steadily, not to gamble on one dramatic trade. He decided not to pursue the business opportunity. And here is what happened next. The foreign country he would have traveled to experience political upheaval that year. Merchants who had gone there lost everything. Some were killed in riots. By staying home, by following the guidance he received through bibliomancy, the merchant avoided disaster. Did God actually guide his hand to that specific verse? Or was it random chance that happened to align with sensible business advice? We cannot know. But to the merchant, the experience confirmed that bibliomancy worked. God had spoken to him through Scripture and saved him. and he told this story to others, which reinforced the practice in his community. The tragedy of misinterpretation. But I also want to tell you a darker bibliomancy story, because not all outcomes were positive. There is a recorded account from 15th century France of a young man who was in love with a woman his family disapproved of. She was from a lower social class. His parents had arranged a different marriage for him. He was torn between duty and desire. On New Year's night, he performed bibliomancy, asking whether he should follow his heart and marry the woman he loved, even if it meant defying his family. The Bible opened to the book of Judges, chapter 14, the story of Samson and Delilah. The young man read about Samson's destructive love for a woman who betrayed him, how his passion led to his downfall, how he lost everything because he could not control his desires. The young man interpreted this as a clear message. His love was dangerous. It would destroy him. God was warning him to obey his family, to marry the appropriate woman, to suppress his feelings. So he did. He ended the relationship with the woman he loved. He married the woman his family chose, and he was miserable for the rest of his life. He never loved his wife. She never loved him. They had children out of duty, not affection. His entire life felt like a mistake, and all because a randomly opened Bible page told him his love was destructive. Do you see the tragedy here? The bibliomancy did not reveal his future. It revealed his fear. He was already afraid that his love was inappropriate, that it would cause problems. So when the Bible opened to a story about destructive passion, he saw confirmation of his fear. But what if the Bible had opened a Song of Solomon instead, to the beautiful love poetry celebrating romantic desire? Would he have interpreted that as permission to follow his heart? Probably. The method of divination did not give him objective truth. It gave him what he was already looking for. Either permission or prohibition depending on what the random page happened to contain. This is the fundamental problem with all divination methods. They are mirrors. They reflect back the hopes and fears you bring to them. They do not show you an objective future. They show you your own psychology, your own interpretation, your own willingness to see certain patterns and ignore others.